Now, our theme for this morning centers around stories of imagination, hope, and care. And for our first story, I'd like to invite storytellers from our very own Umeed's mental health team. So Jahan Zeb, what an honor, actually, more than a friend and a colleague. Jahan Zeb is the driving force behind conceptualizing this conference and making it a reality. A fearless leader of the mental health team, she is not only a skilled therapist, but also a trainer with over 12 years of experience. She has a special interest in working using narrative ideas in diverse contexts, as well as developing training programs and narrative ideas that are relevant in India. Of course, the one thing about Jahan Zeb is that she is the only person at Umeed who can either rock your sanity or then help you maintain it somewhat. Jill is a senior therapist and training lead at Umeed with a special interest in using narrative ideas with young children experiencing autism. She also enjoys working with the communities. Apart from that, though, Jill also has a very special interest in dance, and she is a fabulous dancer. So watch out, because you may just finding yourself shaking a leg with her over the next 2 days. Daisy is also a senior therapist and training lead at Umeed, and has been using narrative ideas in her work for over 5 years now. She is the person who has been working day and night to make today happen. Although Daisy is one of the quietest members of our team, Daisy is a force to be reckoned with, because when Daisy talks, we all listen. Those were the meetings in which roles have been designated. And Ravi Raj, fondly known as Ravi by most of us at Umeed, is an occupational therapist by training. His commitment to the families he works with, along with his interest in the field of mental health, have made him an integral part of the Umeed mental health team. Ravi also has a passion for baking, so feel free to catch him outside and negotiate some deals for some cookies. With that, I'll leave it to the Umeed team to talk about some of their work.
So I get to say welcome again. And before we actually start talking about some of the things that we would like to share, I want to share a story. And I thought I would share a story of how this keynote has actually happened and how the four of us are sitting in front of you. I want to say 50 minutes is a really long time, seems like it, and then suddenly it seems like no time at all. And we've been arguing about what we should include, and some of you who've been there at the pre-conference would have seen us in huddles at different points, trying to work out what we were going to leave out and what we were going to keep in. Many sleepless nights, arguments, some of which included whether we should color our hair or not, have a haircut or not. 9 o'clock last night, we have a keynote. And so, you know, we're very, very excited to share some of our work with you, and we thought we would start today by sharing a little bit about our experience and what has actually drawn us to the narrative approach and why we find it so relevant in our context. And then we'll move on to share a little bit about some of the work that we have been doing. And I get to speak first. So from a really, really early age, as long back as I can remember, I've been very fascinated with the mind and wanting to work with people. And I can vividly remember starting to learn psychology, and very quickly 2 things stood out to me. One was ideas about mental illness, and a lot of what you heard was that people with mental illness couldn't achieve things, that they more or less ended up staying dependent, that there's some things that should not be taken very seriously. And why this stood out for me was because it didn't fit with my experience of a lot of close people who had what I like to think of as different minds. And what I saw was people learning to manage their symptoms, doing things differently, and living what the world knows of as ordinary lives, regular lives, and this was not represented anywhere. My learning continued, and I was introduced, sorry, I'm known as a tearjerker also, so you'll just have to bear with me. My learning continued, and I was introduced to, at some point in my study, to postmodern ideas, and suddenly I had found something that seemed to fit much more. I was introduced to ideas about multiplicity, multiple stories, something which would embrace diversity, and understanding that there is a partiality in knowledge, and that any idea is more often than not incomplete, and we know whatever we know is in some way biased. And you know, I continued my exploration in these ideas and found myself in a family therapy program in the United States, and that's where I met narrative ideas for the first time. And suddenly I had tools that could help me to actually work in this way, and I was really very taken with the approach, and ended up sort of really following that and studying it. And I can still remember my first job at a community mental health center, and very excited obviously to learn it was my first job. And as part of the job, I was doing family support services, so I worked with parents who were living with adults and caring for adults with mental illness. And I remember so everybody at the job had another job, a parallel duty. We were assigned intake and assessment, and we had to make initial diagnosis, serves me right, as part of the routine. And so very quickly, I came to be known as the V-code girl, and every Wednesday at the end of the day, there would be a pile of files on my desk with a sticky on it, which said, Jahanzeb, kindly put a diagnosis, else we will have to deny this family access to service. I knew that, you know, I would not be able to really fight that system. I would have to put a diagnosis there, because otherwise the family would not get care. But I continued to play that little game, and part of why I did it was because it meant something for me to, and I could see that somewhere people started thinking about what that diagnosis and what that number is. And it is really a way for professionals to communicate with each other about lines of treatment, for us to understand people's experience, and for us to give access to or deny treatment to people. My experience of people was that it meant very little to them. And narrative, you know, one of the main ideas, or one of the key ideas in narrative, is to try and get really experience near descriptions of problems. And that was something that I found really worked well for people. When I started consulting with people, I found that it made a lot more sense. They could understand their problems. They could actually be in a position to see how that was working in their life, to be able to do something about it, because it meant something to them. And there are words in my mind, you know, there's a quote by a psychiatrist. I don't know if any of you have read anything by her, but she is written in a book called An Unquiet Mind, and she had the experience of living with what the world calls bipolar disorder. But this quote has always stayed with me, and has really become my lens for looking at people, and I'm going to take a minute to read it. Which of my feelings are real? Which of the me's is me? The wild, impulsive, chaotic, energetic and crazy one, or the shy, withdrawn, desperate, suicidal, doomed and tired one? Probably a bit of both, hopefully much that is neither. And that is really what has always stayed with me as a lens for looking at people, as a way of understanding what's going on with people. And again, you know, narrative talks a lot about looking at people, and this is something I believe in and I've practiced and I really find useful in my work, is that people are the experts of their lives. They have skills and knowledges, and they have preferred ways of being that sometimes become invisible because the problem has taken center stage. And that as therapists then, our role becomes to use our influence to make those other stories more visible. And again, I have two quotes that immediately come to mind when I think of this and have really guided my work. One is by Jerome Bruner, and it talks about therapists then are trafficking in human possibility rather than settled certainties. And the other person who immediately came to mind was David Epstein. And one of the things he says is every time we ask a question, we generate a possible version of life for the person that we're consulting with. And while I had found my way of working with people, there was another question always in my mind, and that was around access for care. And again, back to my student days, I was a really annoying student who, the one who put up her hand for everything in the class and tried to do everything all the time. And I had been doing many little volunteerships and trying to look at different contexts of work. And I had seen the difference between when there is access to resources and when there isn't. And this is something that was in my mind all the time and drew me back to Bombay, where I started working at Umeed. It's been since 2004, so that's been about 12 years. It's been a hell of a journey. But that's where I got to meet all my co-travelers, and I put up pictures of some of the people who were part of our team. And we've continued to explore the ideas and look at how it's making sense to us in our context and shaping them and reshaping them so that they really fit for the families and the children that we work with. And we've landed up here with the privilege on the behalf of our team, the 4 of us, to share some of our thoughts with you. And that, yes, before I, hand over and let Daisy sort of talk about what drew her to the ideas, what we've had with us always unfailingly are wonderful, wonderful mentors who I cannot thank enough for just being with us all the time. And you'll get to speak with Shona and Maggie and Peggy through the 2 days, so you'll know how lovely they are. But also you'll get to listen to them at one point during the conference when they're talking about their keynotes. So just a very, very big thank you for being such a big part of my journey.
So as I heard Jahanzeb speak, it reminded me of my early internship experiences when I was working in psychiatric institutions and mental health organizations, and the doctors, the therapists there were given this responsibility of independently fixing whatever the problem was, and it was through their expert intervention that they had to fix these problems. And I felt that this position basically privileged the experience and knowledge of the therapist, and it was not the particular knowledge of the person who was actually going through that experience. I remember that there was this feeling of stuckness that I felt as I was expected to give people strategies and tell them what to do. And these were people who were actually going through that experience. Whereas for me, I felt that I have to tell them what to do for something that I had never felt or even experienced. And I felt really uneasy, I felt very unsettled when the therapists there, the doctors there who were in power and authority disregarded the voice of the people they were working with, and they weren't considered normal or typical in the normal and typical ways. And another thought that was often there was that they are just children, and children don't know how to make decisions. Children don't know what is right or wrong for them, and so we need to tell them what to do because we care for them and we know what is best for them. And a quote that I would like to share here is by a famous German philosopher and a cultural critic, Friedrich Nietzsche, and he says that all things are subject to interpretation, and whichever interpretation prevails at a given time is a function of power and not truth. And it is often the power of organizations or institutions, therapists, doctors, parents, who get to decide what are the right ways of treating people, what are the right ways of caring for them, and this comes from the fact that they do not have the ability to take care of themselves, and so we need to care for them. And this was not the only truth, because I just remember so many conversations from the days I had with the people I worked with. And to this day I remember a conversation that I had with a young adult who was under the influence of cocaine, and all the time he was being told what to do. There were strategies and plans being made for him. But once when we were just having lunch together, he was telling me of how he came to the rehab center, And he was telling me about how he valued a relationship with his girlfriend, and he really hoped for a future that was healthy, which was happy for the two of them together. And that was the reason why he decided to come to the rehab center. And so many conversations like this got me thinking that you know, people have certain values, they have certain hopes for their life which guide them on their preferred journeys. And then after my internship experiences, I came to Umeed, and I met all the co-travelers there, and I started exploring and got oriented to the narrative ways of working. One of the key ideas that I'm particularly drawn to is that people are the experts of their lives, and they have the knowledge, they have the skills, they have the abilities to reduce the influence of the problems that they are dealing with. And narrative therapy just gave me the tools, it gave me more effective and respectful ways of working with people. It also gave me the ability to construct conversations with them, which helped me to you know, shape, strengthen and extend these skills, these abilities that people have, and also to identify resources or allies that they want to use which will support them on this journey of their preferred stories. And I would like to share a story of my work with this very interesting 8-year-old boy who was experiencing autism, and his name is Aryan. And Aryan just hated when he lost a game, like he just loved to play, but every time he lost a game he would get really upset and he would start crying. And because of that he got teased by his peers, and because he got teased, because he got bullied, he started hitting them. Sometimes he would shout, he would behave aggressive, and he had come to be labeled in the school by everybody as this whiny crybaby or then this aggressive child. And teachers, other kids, parents would tell them that, you know, don't behave like Aryan, you know, don't behave like a crybaby. And so Aryan was really upset, and I also remember that the teachers and the parents tried a number of behavior management strategies. There were a lot of things that they tried to work and, you know, help him to settle in the school system as well as at home when he lost a game. And then Aryan came to Umeed, and I started working with him, and we started exploring the narrative ways of working with him. And I remember of so many beautiful conversations that I've had with him, where he was, you know, full of tricks. He called them tricks, and he said that I have this ways of, you know, dealing with the meltdown through these conversations. And these meltdowns were basically the name that he had come up with his experience, for his experience. And he said that you know, this is something that you know, is coming in the way of me wanting to do something. And I remember this trick that he shared was that he said that I'm going to imagine this ultimate spider monkey, and this ultimate spider monkey is going to blow a trap from his mouth, and this trap will go and you know, get attached to these kids who are troubling me, and they'll get stuck in this trap. And the moment they get stuck in this trap, then they can't tease me, right? Because I'll tease them, or I'll make fun of them then. And this was something that just stood out for me, because Aryan was also one of the first kids I was working with. And I said, wow, like I would have never been able to come up with a strategy or an idea like that. And it was his imagination, it was his know-how, it was his skills that he used to handle a problem that he was going through. And that was because Aryan was experiencing, you know, this every single day of his life. The teachers, the other kids, parents, or me as a therapist never felt what Aryan was going through, because it was his experience. And also through these conversations, it kind of made visible for me that, you know, Aryan loved the game, but what he also really valued was that he enjoyed playing in a group, he enjoyed playing with other kids, and the meltdowns kind of came in the way of him not wanting to, not getting to experience the peers and not getting to experience the games, because he would be isolated or punished most of the times. And these things that made visible was his preferred stories. He wanted to play the game, and then through different conversations, he soon realized that it is the game that I want to play. I want to be with my peers and enjoy it, and this is what he drew, that he's playing a cricket match with his friend, and he said that it doesn't matter if I lose. And again, it just, and all these conversations, all these kids and families that I worked with, it just makes me realize that it is their skills, it is their abilities, it's their know-how, and narrative therapy just gives us the tools to make this possible for them on their preferred journeys of life.
Before I begin of what I'm going to speak in the keynote, I really want to acknowledge two things that really important points in my journey. One, I think Umeed happened to me, and the second is the Umeed mental health team happened to me. And they have been the two most beautiful parts of my journey so far. What really draws to me to narrative ideas is what it gave me the tools to make the taken for granted ideas visible for people. There were so many of them invisibly invisible that I couldn't even see them until I realized the power of the tool when I met Veer for the first time. And I realized taken for granted ideas that was so invisible and so taken for granted for me, that a family is made up of people who are related to you by blood. But I met Veer, who was all of 10, and he had lost his mom, his dad, his twin brother at different points of his life due to the context that they lived in. And we were engaging in these conversations throughout, and he was experiencing being an orphan. But as he was talking and we were engaging in this conversation, I could hear these number of people who were supporting him in this journey. And for me, it almost sounded like how my family will do that to me. And at one point in our conversation, I asked him, so Veer, what does a family mean to you? And he said to me that, and I still have that, the whole image of that room in front of me while I'm narrating this. He said to me that a family is a group of people who support him, who love him, and who care him. And I said, does that mean that they need to be related to you by blood? And he said, no. So I said, can we draw the family? Can you tell me who is your family? And we started drawing a picture of what his family looks like. He didn't allow me to share his name, but he was very happy that I'm sharing this story. And this is how Veer's family looks like. It is a group of social workers, teachers, friends, and people who live in the neighborhood who are a part of his family. And he got me really wondering about how these taken for granted ideas shape people's experiences. He was experiencing an orphan, but when we created this family, the experience of the label of orphan, he got the power to dismiss it and to experience something that he had a family which was not related to him by blood, but related to him by love, by the care, and the support that they provided. And it got me thinking that of a quote that of Foucault, who has really influenced my work, and that I'm no prophet, but my job is making windows where there were walls once. That these walls are made of these discourses, the taken for granted ideas, and narrative provides that map to make those windows. As I was exploring these maps, I started becoming aware of these taken for granted ideas which were shaping people's experiences. And these maps made them visible for people collaboratively. To take a look at them, how were these taken for granted ideas influencing people's life, marginalizing their experiences that are the preferred ways of being? And these maps helped me deconstruct them with them and let people make a choice what they want to do with it and create an idea of the preferred way of living. And I've been really interested in making them visible, and some of them that have been visible over a period of time. So we are from Bollywood, we love drama. गौर से देखिए इन शब्दों को. You have to listen to your parents all the time. A son needs a father figure in his life. Women are born with maternal instinct. Normal people are heterosexual. Men can't raise children without women. A girl has to move to her husband's house once she is married. Autism is a disability, not an identity. And I can go on. I can go on about how they are so invisibly ingrained and are shaping our experiences over a period of time. But as they are becoming visible to me, and as I'm deconstructing them, it's allowing me to honor diversity. And yeah, that's been the pleasure of this work.
And a lot of the ideas that Ravi you've spoken about are ones that the ones that I've been thinking about as well, and how they've influenced my work once they become more visible. I'm really drawn towards working with young people experiencing autism, and today I would like to share a few stories about that. When I first started studying and learning about autism, what I learned was what I guess everyone learned and what's available in textbooks and what's said in manuals about how autism is a disability with impairments in communication, impairments in socialization, and restricted, repetitive, and stereotypical patterns of behavior, interest, and activities. I learned this, and I remember when I wanted to read more, I would Google. And this was all that came up in the first 8 pages and the next pages. I had a single story of autism. When I started working with young people experiencing autism, I saw something very different. And I was kind of taken by surprise because I remember thinking, oh, how did that happen in my session? I was guided by the ideas, the dominant discourses of autism. And what I saw was different, was different from what I learned. And I started questioning these dominant ideas surrounding autism. And some of them that I've put up here, that they're not interested in socializing. When I remember when I spoke to families and when I spoke to young people, I started realizing that is it really that they're not interested, or is it that they're not getting the opportunities to socialize? Is it that our idea of socializing is different, our meaning of socializing is different compared to their meaning of socializing? I remember working with a young boy, and initially he would say, yes, I would want to call a play date. Yes, I wish I would get invited for a party, a birthday party. And eventually he said, no, it's okay. I would just prefer being home. And it made me question, I mean, we as society define what's socially appropriate. And narrative ideas kind of was drawing and making all of these visible for me. They lack empathy, or they don't experience feelings the way we do. And I could tell you numerous stories about my interactions with families where mothers have told me the little things that their children do, or when they notice that their mothers are upset. They're not able to communicate. Again, the dominant idea of spoken language. And the different ways in which I saw communication happening in my sessions. There was a time with a young boy when I remember there wasn't much verbal language, but we used to pass chits to each other in the session. And I would have a question, and I would put a few pointers down there as possible answers, and I would keep one open, and he would tick and pass it back to me. And that was my way of communicating with him, or through art. They're aggressive and dangerous. I can't remember any session where they were aggressive and dangerous. But the dominant idea that media portrays is so different. I remember, I remember this particular young person I was working with, and I had heard about aggression, and every time, even if he would lift his hand to touch his hair, I remember stepping back thinking, you know, being scared because I went with the idea of the single story of autism, that they're not able to make their own decisions. Do we actually give them opportunities? And all of these questions were coming to my mind when I was, because I was seeing different things. And it made me think, and I think the reason I'm drawn to so much towards narrative ideas and practices is because it talks about the relationship of power and how stories, single stories, are defined by power, are defined by who says them, how often they're said, when were they said. And I thought back and I was thinking about the creation of autism and how it was done by many powerful people, powerful in terms of knowledge and had a lot of power in society, and how power can make something a definitive story of the person. You know, because the voice is so strong, it can subjugate the voices of people experiencing autism. And I remember recently when I was doing research and reading, and there was so little available where voices of individuals experiencing autism was barely there. I think it's still coming up, but it was barely there. So now what autism looks to me is like this. There is a story of deficit, but there are many other stories of autism. My work has started changing. I don't go with the ideas that I had. I go with many more ideas and many more, and I think it's kind of made me more freer when I enter the session. And I look at autism as not just a story of deficit, but a story of diverse ways of communication, a story of diverse way of socializing, a story of diverse skills. And when I look at it in this way, it's making me think of what we think in narrative about how there's no single truth, there's no one truth, and there are many truths. And when we honor, when we allow for these many truths and many stories to happen, and we give that space, we are honoring diversity. So I would like to leave you with this quote that's very close to me. It's by Chimamanda Adichie, where she says that when we reject a single story, when we realize that there is never a single story about any place, we regain a kind of paradise.
And just to sum it up, there's one other, I mean, there are many other sort of key ideas and practices that guide our work, but one of the things that we have found particularly relevant in our Indian context is the idea of identity being really performed socially and being constructed in our relationships and connections with people. And this is particularly appealing, I think, in our context, because as a culture, as a group of people, there's a lot of value still given to interdependence. We still sort of exist in joint family systems. Things are done, celebrations are done in communities, done together. And the narrative approach actually gives you tools and ways to be able to sort of link people's lives around shared experiences and really use those as skills and resources to help people move towards their preferred stories. And we've done a lot of work in that as well, and had experiences of linking people around common shared life situations or experiences that they've had. And we've used what we call the journey metaphor to group and work with children who've been experiencing different traumatic situations. We've worked by linking the lives of fathers who are managing children who are experiencing disability. We've done groups with mothers, with siblings of the children who receive services at Umaid. And we've also found other ways to link lives. So groups is one, but we've used letters in our therapeutic sessions to connect children together so that they might share their skills and they might share their experiences of negotiating the world. And Ravi has something that he calls the Pen Pal project, where he's grouped young boys together, and they're sharing their experiences of adolescence and all the difficulties that they're working with as they pass through that journey in their life.
And it was inspired by Scott's work. When I came to know that you're coming to teach us, I started looking up for the work you were doing, and I found the idea of Pen Pal projects. And then I thought, why not just do it? Because I was hearing them in different rooms. And I thought, how do I connect them? Because they are such beautiful support for each other. And then that happened. So, thank you.
And you get to hear from Scott too later in the day. So these are some of the ideas and practices that have supported us in doing our work with children and families. But that same earlier question around access and what drew me back to Bombay continued to stay with us as a team. And I think as a group, even at Umeed, we were really moving toward looking at building resources in the community, looking at building resources for working with children, with families, and had a number of training programs already started where we were working with community workers, with teachers, with parents, and as a mental health team. One of the other things we had at that time found were there were not a lot of people working with children in the city. I can remember days where we had 6-month, 9-month wait lists, and Saturdays where we had 8 appointments, and we had to beg the scheduling person and say, look, I know the wait list is 9 months, but I still need to eat on Saturdays, so you have to give me a lunch break. So that's how backed up we were, and it really was something that we got very excited by, the idea of doing training for people that might be interested in working with children, and for people who might be interested in exploring narrative ideas, since we had found it so relevant and useful. But there wasn't a lot of opportunity to explore these practices, and that's what started us on our training journey. And we'll continue to share some of our training experiences.
So these intentions of actually building capacity and resources led us to the development of our first training program, which is called as the Mental Health Training Program in 2010. And this is a year-long part-time program for professionals working with children, families, groups, or communities. And this program is very, very unique because it brings together, it's a collaboration. So Umeed teaches it in collaboration with Narrative Practices Adelaide and Reauthoring Teaching Vermont. So it is bringing 3 teachers from 3 different cultures, 3 different countries together, and teaching these ideas in the Indian context and making it relevant to the people we work with. One thing that we've realized in our work is that these ideas, the narrative ideas and practices, need to be kind of applied and stretched to the work settings that people are coming from. And therefore, the mental health training program has this fantastic component of having weekly supervision meetings. And these supervision meetings are basically a safe space for people to explore together, to collaborate with a small group of peers who are coming from a similar context or background. And there's a lot of food in these meetings. So there's always food at Umeed, and there's always food in these supervision meetings. Another very important thing for us is that the narrative ideas, the narrative approach has been used in counseling and community work, but a lot of professionals who did the mental health training program were not only from the mental health space. We had professionals coming from, we had professionals like special educators, occupational therapists, physical therapists, developmental pediatricians who have done the program, and it's really exciting to see how they've used creative and different ways of applying the ideas in their context, in their settings. And today before lunch, you'll actually see a very interesting panel of these professionals coming together and talking about their journey and their work with using the ideas and practices in their different work settings, which are different from the counseling practice. Another thing about the mental health training program is that we have also conducted up till now, so 2010 is when we started and 2016, we've had 5 mental health training programs year after year, and we've trained 55 professionals all over the country, and we've also trained them in 35 different organizations. And it's so fascinating for us to see as a team how these ideas are spreading across the country, and people are using it in their practices and different settings, as well as some professionals have even gone up to set their own centers, their own organizations, and 2 such centers are ASK, which is the Adult Support Kendra. It's a center for children, for adults and families with difficulties, and a Child Development Center in Pune. So the work is spreading, and the resources are being built across the community.
Yeah. And one of the things we were thinking about is how do we make our reach more to people, and the idea of training community workers came about while we were doing the mental health training program, because we wanted to make narrative ideas more accessible to the community and to the people. And at Ummeed, there were a lot of trainings for community workers and different training programs, and we realized that the workers actually voiced the need of having some tools to support families while they engage with them. And so we decided to come up with the community mental health training program, which again is a 1-year part-time training program. And what we did here was we consulted the community to make the curriculum. We to get a feel of what are some of the problems that the community experiences. And what we also realized that to make it more accessible is that we'll have to localize the language. And that was a big transition for all of us. I mean, we're smiling here, but we've really struggled with our Hindis, and we worked on it. I think we're getting better. But so Hindi is the one that we run the community training program in. And I think there are 2 things that I would like to highlight in the program. One is the process of the language, the translation. I mean, we actually thought it'll be very simple. We have all the concepts of narrative, we have them all ready, we just need to give them to the translator and we're done. So we gave it to one who actually does the translations for us, and she's a PhD in Hindi. She did it really quick, and we got it, I think, in what, 2 weeks?
Yeah.
In 2 weeks, and the material comes back, and all of us are looking at it, and we're like, it's like Latin. I mean, we don't even know what this means. And she had done a really good job, but what we realized is, in all fairness, I mean, what we realized is that those were literal translations, and the Hindi that was used is more in Hindi literature, and how local Hindi is very different. So we read, and one of the learnings from this was how important language is, and how easily meaning can get lost in language. And with the support and with the help of our community mental health workers who went through the training, they actually helped us in translating a lot of the material. And we could see the difference, because when we gave it to the second batch and they did a comparison, it was much more easier. And it's still a process, it's still happening, the translations are happening. Just to give you an example, so one of narrative's key ideas is about how life is multi-storied. And in Hindi, it came back as "Zindagi mein bahut sari manzile hoti hai," which so they meant stories of a building rather than the stories that we speak about, and we realized that, and there were many such examples. I mean, we've had sessions of review. Haven't stopped laughing. I think we've just been laughing at what the meaning had turned into. So yes, so it's a process, it's still happening. And the second very important thing that really stands out to me about the program is the supervision. A lot of the community workers have a lived experience of being in the community, and supervision becomes a space not just The thing in community is we did it a little differently, where it was a space for them not just to talk about the work. We did not, the idea was how they could use these ideas in their context, but also a lot of sharing of stories that happened in their own lives, and how through the journey there were shifts in their personal narratives. And we all have the privilege actually of hearing them tomorrow, where they'll be sharing stories of their work and their personal journeys with us.
And to take this further, we were listening participants telling us that 1 year long commitment, 1 year long training is a big commitment for us. Or before we take that commitment, can we have an exposure to the ideas just to know what we are getting into before we start the training? So December last year, 2015, we began our journey with the 2-day workshops. This 2-day workshop is about introduction to the narrative ideas and practices. And we began our journey from Mumbai to Pune to Bangalore to different parts of India, and started traveling with the narrative ideas at different parts of the country. And some of you are here in the picture and here today, and it is a pleasure to see you, to be here back at the Room Full of Stories. And there are many things while we were teaching that stood out for us. And one of the things that stood out for us is the diverse people who came to this workshop. We kept it open for people to come and explore these ideas. And we had homeopaths, we had artists, we had principals of school, heads of organization, human resource managers. We had sports mentors. We had varied amount of diverse people coming and exploring what these ideas mean to them. But what was interesting is the meaning that they were making of these ideas, and the way they were thinking about how to apply that into their context. And I was sharing with Maggie yesterday that I think the pleasure of teaching is listening to people of what they are making meaning out of. And I think I had the privilege of doing that during this teaching program. The other thing that stood out to me is we have this feedback questionnaire. We ask people at the end of the training, what stood out for you in this? And they all write it down, and we collate this data. And one of the things that stood to most of the people was the idea of single stories. And most of them wrote that now we know that there is never a single story to a person, that there is always multiple stories to people. And they have also written that it allows us now to be non-judgmental of people, that we can witness what's happening with knowing that there are multiple stories to people. The other thing that really stood out for us is this particular place. It's called the Handy Himachal Therapy Unit in Himachal Pradesh, in a town of Kullu, Manali. It's the only organization in the state of Himachal which works with children with disabilities, who are experiencing disabilities. And while we were training here, we went with the idea of training from metropolitan cities and going to a small town and working with teaching the people there. And while we were engaging in this teaching, we realized that the training needed to be adapted to the culture where it was in. Because we realized that having conversation and a reflection is a privilege that people in metropolitan cities have. People in the town of Kullu didn't do it that way. They didn't have conversation to reflect. What they did was they sang songs, they drew things, they danced, and we changed our training program. The second day was all about singing and dancing and drawing things rather than having just conversations. And I think it was such a realization for us as teachers.
Absolutely. And that brings us to, what about us? That was, we always have questions. And we were really talking a lot about using the narrative ideas in the supervision space. And this is a training that actually is very keen and very close to all our hearts, because it helps us create a space for us to explore the effects of the work, for us to link our lives together in doing this work, and to sort of make visible again the values that are bringing us all here. It helps to sort of work with professional identities, looking at them again as people as have skills, people that have knowledge, And we had the good fortune of actually piloting one round of this project with our own supervisors at Umeed, and it was just, it was a fabulous experience. I think we enjoyed it a lot, and we're really hoping to take this, this training forward as well as time goes by. And one of the things that we did at that workshop was to co-create what supervision meant for us at Umeed, and I've just put that there, but I'm not going to read it. So yeah, that is our training journey. And you know, while we've talked about what drew us to the work and a little bit about what we have been doing, we also started to think about the road ahead and what is it that we want to do now. And there was a quote that immediately came to mind, and I think of Steve Jobs and what he says, the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. And I think everybody just jumped up, everybody loved it, that's us. So we put that up there. And you know, I think all of us really want, have held on to this hope of having a community of people that will be interested in these ideas and would want to explore them. And so today each one of you is here making that dream come true, but also there's some things we're hoping as we go ahead. And I'm going to start by saying we hope.
Next slide.
Oh, sorry.
So this is the map of India, Bharat, and the places that you see that are connected through the red lines are the places where narrative ideas and practices have traveled in and around India. So it's moved from Mumbai to Goa, to Chennai, to Himachal, to Dehradun, to Bangalore, and to Nepal, and so many more. And we really hope that in the years to come, the map just gets fuller. There's no space, and these wonderful ideas reach all the places possible on our map and even beyond. So this is our hope. No, don't clap yet. We have some more hopes. We have a lot of hopes.
We're very hopeful.
Hurry, we have only 3 minutes.
Sorry. We hope that that narrative ideas are explored in different contexts and in varied contexts, and not just in the counseling setup, in the context of parenting, in the context of organizations, in the context of team building, and diverse way possible. We are keeping the possibilities open.
We hope to have trainers from our communities who will then go out and reach, and there are some trainers here, and I'm hoping you all are listening, who will reach out to more and more people. And we hope to make narrative literature more accessible and have different languages like Hindi, Marathi, and Gujarati available, literature available in those languages.
Hope Vijay is listening to this.
Yes.
And while we're doing all these things and making them real in our copious free time, we're also hoping to publish some of our work. And in that same vein, we've recently sort of started going back to some of the families that we've been consulting with since 2006 to get their voices and their experiences of what their, how the narrative approach has been working for them and what they've been thinking about it. And hopefully we'll be able to share that with all of you soon.
And we hope that as teachers, one of the things that has always stood out for us while we are teaching is the smiles people have on their faces. And the twinkle in their eye that they have in your teaching is that there is this resonance they have with the ideas, that there is some kind of a realization that is happening all through the teaching, and you see that happening on their faces when you're teaching. And we are hoping to spread this smiles to people. And I remember this particular conversation I had with a participant after a 2-day workshop. She said that these ideas and these practices are like coming back home. That is almost making me feel I'm back home. And it has stayed with me, and I think if this feeling is spread, it is. And I remember Vardha saying it, and Vardha is here. She said to me that she's a community health worker, somebody who inspires me all the time when she says something. She said to me that if these ideas spread to everybody, wouldn't world be a happier place to live in? And I said,
yes.
So, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to us.
So while while these guys are taking a picture, I just want to say a big thank you to Jahanzeb, Jill, Daisy, and Raviraj. Listening to the stories and being a part of this journey as it started so many years ago makes me feel nothing but pride in terms of being part of this team. So thank you again.